Okay, while Rick and Dan are swapping places, we have our transportation panelists. And we've saved some really tough questions for our two panelists. Dr. Robert Richard is the Vice President of Regulations and Compliance for Label Master Services, providing dangerous goods regulatory assistance to customers worldwide by drawing on his vast experience and knowledge of the hazardous materials regulations and extensive network of dangerous goods professionals worldwide. From 2006 to 2010, Bob served as the Deputy Associate Administrator for the Hazardous Materials Safety Program within the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration at the U.S. Department of Transportation, also known as PHMSA, where he was responsible for directing approximately 150 hazardous materials transportation specialists and the day-to-day operation of the U.S. Hazardous Materials Transportation Safety Program. So please welcome Dr. Robert Richard. And joining Bob on our transportation panel is Brigham A. McGowan, President and Chief Executive Officer of Nouveau Incorporated in Washington, D.C. After 26 years of combined federal, civilian, and military service, Brigham now serves as a thought leader and attorney advisor to both public and private sector clients interested in matters pertaining to energy, transportation, homeland security, and the environment. And until 2007, he served as the federal government's chief energy transportation safety regulator as the administrator of the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration in Washington, D.C. Thank you for being with us both today. So please help me in welcoming Brigham. Thanks for coming here today. Okay. I'm very intrigued by these questions. For the past several years, DOT's most frequently cited violations have been in the areas of training, registration, and emergency response data. In which areas have shippers made the most improvement, and in which areas are they still failing to consistently comply?
First?
Yes.
Well, let me first thank all the diehard people who are hanging in here till the end.
Yes, yes.
And also on the webcast, so I hope, I appreciate that. You know, I have to be honest, and I think, you know, enforcement people are human beings, and there's as much importance in training hazardous materials professionals as the enforcement people as well. And a lot of times, enforcement people go into a facility, and they're going to hit the low-hanging fruit. So all those things you mentioned are low-hanging fruit. And actually, when I was there, enforcement people reported to me, and I reported to Brigham at one point, and we said, hey, registration, you know, that's our grant money. Let's make sure they're paying up their registration. So there's a big focus on that. But training, when I go out and I do audits for companies, my clients nowadays, I can tell them what the top 10 things that a company is, what an enforcement person is going to look at. So if you're not fixing those problems right away, it makes no sense, you know, because you know you're going to get inspected sooner or later. As far as enhancements or where there's been an improvement, you know, for me, right today, we have huge challenges because we have so many people who can put something into transportation. And it's almost scary. I mean, it could be consumers. There's people on eBay. When I was at the agency, I started a program. We started looking at what people were selling on eBay, and you would be amazed.
Wow.
You know, I had a guy who was selling gallium and having it shipped all over the world on airplanes. And I wrote to him from my home email address and said, you know, that's a hazardous material. You really need to be careful about that stuff. You know, you should be complying with the regulations, packaging it properly, and declaring it. He says, oh, it's no more dangerous than lemon juice. Just relax. So the next day I wrote as Deputy Associate Administrator for Hazardous Materials Safety and a little more stern warning and said, you know, you should cease and desist because the gallium is corrosive to aluminum and airplanes are made of aluminum. And he was not very forthcoming and not willing to cooperate, so I just called, he was in Austria, I called the Austrian Competent Authority and they closed this place down. But, you know, these things,
wow.
But these things are,
yeah,
they're really scary, you know. It's just, it's scary to see how many people put things on airplanes, you know, how many people are putting lithium batteries in the cargo compartments of airplanes. So,
wow, wow.
Brigham?
Yeah, I think, there have been, and Bob's exactly right. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. Obviously, after 9/11,
Yeah.
we had regulations in place to come up with a security plan. So that was something that was hit quite often. I talked to PHMSA earlier today and said, hey, what are your top ones? And they said cylinder and drum manufacturing, retesting. They said complying with paperwork still, including the special permit, which we used to call exemptions, but in the government we have to relabel everything 10 years,
Yeah,
whether it needs
rebrand
it or
us.
not. So
Yeah.
that's another area, as well as training. Training is still an area. That's also low-hanging fruit, like most audits or inspections. The paperwork for all of your employees and who's been to what training and are they current or not. Those are the kind of things that get out there. And what I think on the transportation side, what makes the job also more complex is that PHMSA, our old agency, writes the hazardous materials safety regulations, but they are enforced concurrently by not only by PHMSA, but each different agency within the U.S. DOT that's responsible for their type of transportation. So you have PHMSA out there, but you have the FAA out there. You have the Federal Motor Carrier out there. You have
That's
the
right.
Federal Railroad. You have the U.S. Coast Guard, which, until 9/11 was part of the U.S. DOT. So you have all these agencies out there trying to interpret the regulations written by PHMSA, and they not only don't always agree, but they come up with different penalties and different remedies for the same regulations. And that causes a lot of confusion, especially when maybe somebody from PHMSA shows up and says, well, this is okay, but you need to fix it. And then it's like a TV program. And then the next guy comes in the door and says, well, I'm here to inspect you. And then there's a state guy that shows, and you get a
states, too,
different
get
answer
involved
for
in there.
everything. That gets very
Wow.
confusing.
You mentioned that, there's like a top 10 list. I know that OSHA sometimes publishes, what they have, their top 10 list on their website. Is this something that PHMSA or DOT makes available publicly so you can see, here's what the industries we're going to target or the segments we're
Yeah,
going to
absolutely,
target?
and they'll come out and talk to you and tell you about it. I've invited them to conferences that my company puts on, and we invite the enforcement guys, and they come to the conference and say, here's what we're looking for. And if you just follow what the agency's doing, that you know what they're targeted on. What are the bad words today? Crude oil, lithium batteries. Those.
Wow.
The focus is just, you really need to be aware of that so that you can, but you should be complying with most of these things anyways, so.
Right. And I know that there are probably a lot of good resources, including training modules and things that are available both through your company and through the DOT and the PHMSA website. So, it's not because there isn't,
Right.
a good broad-based access to the knowledge.
There are a lot of things out there. In fact, one of our inspectors from the southern region just put up 19 PHMSA hazmat presentation modules on LinkedIn and Facebook.
Okay.
The agency offers a website, hazmat.dot.gov. You can go to find this. They offer multimodal, Bob? Multimodal
They're
training.
free multimodal courses. They do them like 4 times a year and invite people to come in for free. And they just cover all the hot button issues that they're concerned about.
But you raise a good point, and PHMSA. So PHMSA is half pipeline and then everything else. So the pipeline regulations are less than an inch thick, and the hazmat regulations are 800-900 pages or so.
2 volumes now. They couldn't
3
fit into 1
volumes
volume.
now,
2,
and they're complicated. And
Yeah.
I remember when I was at the agency, I said, well, you get 3 people in the room and you go, well, what does this say? And they wouldn't even agree. And you'd say, well, this is complicated. Wow. And literally the answer from one of the employees was, well, if it's too complicated, I said, look, we have to make this in plain English language. The executive order for Vice President Gore was still in effect. And we said, well, and literally the response was, if you can't understand this, then you shouldn't be doing it. And I said, no, that's not the best answer. But it is complicated, and I think in your previous panel talking, it's getting more complicated. And companies like Bob that specialize in training, more and more you have to go to your insurance companies or outside third-party vendors for your expertise, because just like in the practice of law, it's difficult to do everything anymore. Everything has gotten so specialized.
Yeah, let me just say one thing about the training. There's a lot of resources available, but for me, when I go and talk to a company and we do an assessment, we look at their operations, it's really important to tailor the training to your operations. You know, people think of hazmat training. Well, there's 9 classes of hazardous materials, and you go through the criteria, and here's how you label, here's how you package. And, you know, for me, that's basic stuff. It's how about companies that are loading and unloading bulk cargo, bulk containers, and perhaps they're not inspecting their hoses, or they don't have a standard operating procedure for which chemical goes into which tank. And there's so many things when you look at the serious incidents that have occurred in the United States that we don't focus on those very important aspects of functions that people are performing to ensure that we don't have incidents in the future. And I agree with the previous panelists about root cause analysis. When I was at the agency, I sent every one of my inspectors to a root cause analysis course. And under that administration, we were very serious about every incident, not just to let NTSB go out and do it. We would go out and look at it. And every single incident in the United States of America, thank God I'm not there anymore, it was on my BlackBerry. And I would have to make a decision on how I was going to keep my leadership informed, all the way up to the Secretary of Transportation. He's like, what are you guys doing about this?
Wow.
You know, and so we would try to learn from each one, and then I would sit all my people down, and we sit in a room and say, how do you think we should fix this? What can we do? And it shouldn't be all about new regulations. It's like, you know, best practices and education and making people more aware that this is something maybe they'd never thought about. What was it? Unconscious, what was this, the term? Unconscious, you don't know what you don't know?
What you don't know and you don't want to know.
So part of it is just educating people that this is a problem, you know? Hey, did you ever think about this?
Well, I want to pick up on one thing that I think I heard you both say, is that transportation involves a lot of different people doing it. And so obviously if you're a commercial carrier, commercial shipper, you've got to meet regulations. But there's a wide universe of people shipping and transporting that may not be subject to regulations. In your view, what sector of the universe out there that doesn't currently have mandatory awareness or mandatory training do you think would benefit most from either some sort of a voluntary initiative or maybe some requirement that they get on board and become more knowledgeable about shipping and transport?
You want to go first?
Yeah, sure, I'll go first. You know, one thing that Hazmat Transportation has done is they've done a very good job of taking a look at those that transport hazardous materials. For example, in the trucking world, we have 600,000 plus motor carriers. You know, this is the only country in the world where you can go online and fill out a DOT name and get yourself interstate operating authority and slap some numbers on the side of your truck and out you go. But if you want to transport hazardous materials, now you have to have more permits, more regulations are in play. And if you want to transport the really fun stuff, there's even a higher threshold. So, you know, what the regulations have tried to do is carve out those who don't come into contact with it. But obviously, it's the consumer that ships infrequently. People don't know that a can of paint is a hazardous material. People don't know these sorts of things. And so while that's an issue, the agency has thus far focused on those types of undeclared hazardous material shipments that aren't paint, that are more dangerous in nature.
Well, in that regard then, there are also issues related to transporting bulk quantities of things that may inherently by themselves in small quantities not be hazardous. But you get a whole bunch of it together and you're transporting it, and now it could be a very real hazard when you're trying to transport or ship it.
Sure.
Well, and Bob has a lot of experience with the air side. In fact, I was always very jealous because he got to, PHMSA is the U.S. competent authority for ICAO and the UN dangerous goods. So Bob would get to go to Geneva and hang out for weeks on end, and I still don't know what he did while he was over there. But
I road biked around the lake.
but there was always a delay in the phone, and it seemed longer later at night, the delay. But you know, talk about lithium batteries, for example, where, you know, there's an example of something that he has a lot of experience in that at first everybody said, well, you know, so what? We have lithium batteries in everything. But when you put pallets of them together and you ship them certain ways, it's become a large issue.
Yeah, and even you could say like bulk shipments maybe pose a different risk, but you know, it just takes one mistake. And it could be something so minor that, you know, especially with air transport, what kept me up at night when I was a regulator was lithium battery fires on airplanes. You know, what's going to happen? And we've had some serious incidents.
Wow.
Going back to that responsibilities, when I was at the agency, one of the challenging things we did was we had to write what we called the offerer rule. And we defined offerer.
Yeah,
and you know what?
offer.
Anybody who performs any function associated with offering a material for transportation is responsible for doing that function properly. So, you know, not most people don't understand that, sometimes not until the litigation starts, and then they hire Brigham and myself to explain what that means. And you know, it's such a shame that every time there's an incident, the news media focuses, and Congress and political, who's to blame? Why do we have to blame somebody? You know, we should have a non-punitive system like the previous speakers talked about, where, you know, let's just fix the problem and move on. You know, it's not blame Joe over here. It's not his fault. It's the system is broke.
Okay, next question. How will increased use of technology, for instance, RF and ID technology and satellite tracking of hazmat shipments, et cetera, how do you feel that those will have an impact on hazardous materials transportation in the future, good and bad?
Okay, so I worked for one of Brigham's colleagues, Krista Edwards. I loved working for her. She was a really intelligent lady. She was our deputy administrator. And I took her to a FedEx facility, and she sees everything going around and around, and the FedEx guys will call it organized chaos. And everything's efficient. You got all kinds of like sorting systems and such. And then you get to the hazardous materials, and it comes to a screeching halt. It's really slow. And there's no technology, you know. And
Even
so,
the
like,
people are moving like this.
and they're hand loading it into ULDs, you know, and it's just crazy. So, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity for enhanced use of technology in the hazardous materials field, particularly tracking. You know, you could have women's undergarments that you'll know exactly where they might, Victoria's Secret shipments, exactly where they are at any given time, exactly what's in that package, and if someone, you know, if something goes wrong, you know it. But a hazardous materials shipment, how could we not justify that?
Yeah.
So, you know, one of the projects I'm working with is it's called HM Access. I initiated when I was at the agency, and it's all about electronic shipping papers and tracking and using different technologies, sensors, to know exactly what you have and be able to, you know, send something right to the emergency responder so they send out the right equipment, you know, immediately. They don't close that highway down for hours at a time and inconvenience people, you know. So I think there's a lot of opportunities from technology perspective in that regard as far as tracking and being able to respond to incidents more efficiently.
And we're talking about mainly trucking here.
No, every single mode of transportation.
I see.
Every single mode.
Even pipeline.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, even the, you know, on the pipeline side, Pipeline has developed more technology where we have remote sensors, we have leak detection equipment that both have redundant systems that are space-based as well as traditional cellular and landline-based, automatic remote shut-off valves, or the ability to control things remotely. We're starting to see the GPS tracking on the rail side for hazmat, but, you know, Bob's absolutely right. Given where things are in this day and age, the good news is that the hazmat regulations, or dangerous goods regulations, as everyone else in the free world calls them, are relatively harmonized. They've been around for a long period of time. The first guy that, I don't know, does Al go back to the beginning of DOT?
Yeah, Al used to go to the first UN meetings back in 1957 when they started
Wow.
writing the model regulations. I
was
think I
there-
have a copy of the first version.
Wow.
And everybody
most of us
calls
were
him
2
to this
years
day
old.
King Al, because
King Al.
this guy, there
Father
were people,
Hazmat.
There are
Father
people that were the
Hazmat.
father of hazmat, and so things are highly harmonized, and we've learned. You know, I was a Navy pilot before, and the book, every time there's a crash, the book got thicker because we realized we shouldn't do that anymore. Somebody died or something. So the safety book kept getting larger. The good news is the hazardous materials regulations are pretty mature and pretty well developed, but we don't really take advantage and leverage technology. The rest of the world has changed. And think about this on the pipeline side. Next time you see a guy spraying a can of spray paint on the ground, trying to figure out where the underground utilities are located.
Yeah.
And that's the joke, is wow, they
Yeah.
did the same thing back in
811.
Roman times.
811.
811 we've rolled out.
Yeah, that was under your
But
watch.
the technology is lagging, and there's frankly no excuse for it.
Yeah, and one of the things I think that I'm on, they say I went to the dark side. I think my experience as a regulator and now being on this side is really refreshing. Yeah, I see a lot of things.
Yeah.
When I first joined Label Master, one of my colleagues, P.E. Ayla, she worked for Atlas Cargo aircraft company. And she said, "Okay, Bob, now I can tell you everything I couldn't tell you before." Yeah, it was amazing. But the slippery slope is this. So let's look at crude oil shipments. We've had these incidents, and now the government, both U.S. and Canada, are very, very concerned about this. And Canada put out a rule that says you have to have proof of classification, and you have to maintain it for 5 years. Now, folks, that's not just for crude oil. Okay, and you know what other additional restrictions and prohibitions and onerous requirements are going to be put on all flammable liquids? Or if we look at lithium batteries, and the ICAO Dangerous Goods Panel is saying, well, fire suppression doesn't work well against lithium batteries, so we're just going to ban them from being transported. Well, then what's next? I can look at a whole host of different hazardous materials that might be on an airplane. I'd be concerned about it. So it is a slippery slope. We just have to find other solutions to reduce the risk. I mean, I really would like to see better fire suppression systems on all aircraft. You know, and I know that some of the companies are voluntarily doing it, but that would go a long way because you have undeclared shipments all the time, and you just never know what you're going to deal with. So why don't you put the system on the plane so you can address it?
Okay, well that leads into this next question here.
I knew that.
How have the different segments of hazardous materials transportation been affected by increasing homeland security concerns? Because this definitely ties into what you're talking about.
Well, obviously, hazardous materials, by and large, most of them, you know, the point behind hazardous materials and transportation shipments primarily were accidental releases, unintended releases, property damage, environmental damage. And, you know, the regulations were put from that perspective. And you know, there's been an interesting back and forth since 9/11. For a while after 9/11, there was an edict that we can't let anybody know where any of the pipelines are in the country. So we pulled down the pipeline mapping system. And then everybody said, oh my gosh, well, I'm supposed to know where the pipeline is so I don't hit it, but you've just taken it off the screen.
Right.
So, you know, there's been give and take. I don't know if you're around the day the call came from the Deputy Secretary at DHS, and he said, I want you to remove all placarding from every hazmat shipment.
We had to spend $250,000 to have Volpe do a study to say that's a stupid idea. But
yeah, and he's like, Brigham, are you there? And I'm like, I'm sorry, my mouth is still opening. But, you know, so there has to be sort of a balance. And I think we've learned a balance, and we've started to regulate those things which are dual use or that can be diverted. And we have kind of clamped down on those. And there is some technology that's being developed and in use. And rail corridors through sensitive areas in particular have benefited significantly from the deployment of technology and intrusion alarms and other pieces. So there are things that are out there. But, you know, as things change, there are always concerns that, you know, that people have to stay a step ahead. And that's why it requires close coordination between the safety people at DOT and the security people over at DHS.
It was really interesting times after 9/11 because Brigham was there, I was there, and, you know, the DHS was brand new. And they had some interesting ideas. They came over and they said, we're going to put armor plating on all your tank trucks and rail cars. And we're like, oh, that's not a good idea because you won't have any room for the lading. But it was an interesting time because they wanted to control over everything, and we were writing a lot of security rules. So we had to go back and forth, and eventually it got better. But, you know, I think we did a lot quickly after 9/11, but I think it's time maybe we go back and look at some of these things.
Pull back on some of them, maybe?
Well, just revisit, you know.
Just revisit
I'll give you
them.
one example. There's security awareness training for anyone who ships hazardous materials.
Right.
I have a client that ships shock absorbers. Why does he need security awareness training? You know, or an automobile company that, you know, has different shock absorbers and airbags
Windshield
and
wiper
paints.
fluid.
Yeah.
It's
Yes,
covered.
right. So, you know, it's just, I always just put one slide in the training. Okay, I checked that box. We're done. Move on. But, you know, it's maybe there's some things that we could revisit.
And do you think that some of these issues that have been brought up as a result of Homeland Security concerns after 9/11 have, in your perception, do you get the feeling that the public, even if they don't exactly feel like they're more secure, that they're more aware of the hazards that are surrounding them? And, you know, who should I call if I see something,
Yeah.
you know, in that
With,
regard?
I think at that time we were trying to make everybody a police officer or eyes and ears and make them,
Right.
you know, aware that they.
Yeah, but you know, by the same token, it kind of cuts both ways. I think it has helped, and I think there's regulatory reform that needs to occur. But by the same token, you know, we've talked about West Texas. You know, people are oblivious that there's a fertilizer plant, you know, across the street from,
Yeah, right.
you know, from assisted living facilities or schools. So. More needs to be done, and like any program, as we talk about, well, you know, you're in enforcement, right, at
Right.
EPA. There's a balance, right? There's there's
Yes.
the education, outreach. Enforcement is one of the tools in the toolbox, and part of the important piece is getting the information out and seeking voluntary compliance with the regulations. And then enforcement is reserved for those that are willful noncompliance, and that's kind of where the DOT still is today.
And you know, OSHA has a voluntary, you know, audit and come to Jesus program, if you will,
Like a
about
safe
getting,
harbor kind of
yeah,
deal
you
where
know,
you
you
can-
come a VPP program and you volunteer and you begin it, and you're kind of going with your hat in your hand and you're asking OSHA to come in and tell us where we can do better, and we'll, you know, we get put on a timeline to make the improvements and all that. You know, does DOT or
They have
there
a
been-
hazmat safety assistance team, and then
Yeah.
on the pipeline side, they have I forget what the acronym is for their
CATS team members?
CATS team,
Yeah.
and they'll come out and they'll help people
They'll do
to
that?
yeah.
Do they have a
But
small business
it-
administration or a small business arm?
Not really.
that?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, there's not, and you do have to be careful because again, enforcement is broken up between all these different sub-agencies or subsidiaries. Sometimes like in any large organization, it comes down to individuals, and it comes down to enforcement discretion. And so there is no legal safe harbor provision like there is in a lot of other
Programs.
Yeah.
programs.
I always felt bad that a company should be able to self-report and not get, you know, beat up over the head. I just couldn't stand it when, like, you know, the airlines would report something, and then an FAA would go and just like nail them with a $75,000 fine because there's no incentive for them to keep doing that. And when I was there, I created this program. It was somewhat controversial. Some people didn't really get it, why this would be a good program. So we had a retail store and a company, big one, and we went in and did some inspections. We found some really horrific compliance issues. So we said, hey, we're going to hit you with a $3 million fine. They said, fine, here's the check. And they paid us. And I said, well, wait a second. It's not over yet. So we called all their executives in, their lawyers, and we sat them around the conference room at DOT and PHMSA. And I said, we got a new program. I just made it up. You know, we coordinated, but, you know, it was, and we call it Systems Integrity Safety Program. And here's how it works. You have a choice to sign an agreement with us. They don't really have much of a choice. And if you sign the agreement, we're going to give you one of our best investigators, and you're going to allow him to go into your company, and you're going to give him anything he wants to see.
Right.
Can't hide anything from us, and he's not going to give you anything he finds. He's not going to write a penalty for it for 3 months or whatever time frame we think is appropriate to really understand your operations. But at the end of that 3 months, he's going to give you some recommendations, and you'll have a certain period of time to implement those recommendations. If you do them all, that's great. We both benefit because you're compliant, the public's safer, and we've done our job and solved the problem. And so, you know,
Win-win.
it was
Yeah.
win-win. And They actually signed the agreement, and that process, that program is still in place. Actually, I was with a client. We went down there. He had a violation, and he said, hey, you think we can get that SIS program? And I'm like, oh, not for your thing. It's too small. And we went in there, and they said, hey, we're going to offer you the SIS program. I was like, wow, this is great.
Wow, wow.
But, you know,
wow.
it's a positive way to change behaviors,
Yes.
enhance compliance. You know, people just might not know where their
Exactly,
problems are. And we got them to
exactly.
spend a lot more money than we would have collecting fines from them.
Wow. Okay, let's open it up to the web, and let's take a question from the web.
This webcast question is from a Jeff G. What aspects of hazmat transportation will become obsolete in the future and why? For example, paper manifesting, certain types of containers, air transport, or other bulk transport methods?
Wow, that's interesting.
I'd like to see shipping papers go away. I think it's kind of ridiculous that you have a requirement that you have to have a shipping paper in the door of a truck. You know, I mean, come on. In this day and age, it's just ridiculous. So, you know, I think there's more innovations in containers. I was, you know, in the show, I was walking around the floor. I saw someone who has a very innovative material that absorbs. If you have a leak, it's an absorbent material. It was really cool. But there's a lot of opportunities to enhance safety. Keep it in the package. That's what it's all about. You know,
Keep it in the
keep it in the
package.
package.
Yeah.
There's a lot of technologies that can be used to do that. I just think that the regulations sometimes, the way they're written, doesn't give you the opportunity to use those other things, different packages. It should be more performance-based. So, you know, here's what we want to achieve. You can do it any way you want it as long as you achieve this goal.
Agree with everything Bob said.
Well, you mentioned too that you said that you thought that it was a real possibility that transporting lithium batteries was just going to become obsolete. That you just can't transport them.
Yeah,
anymore.
it's you know, it's
Wow.
a slippery slope because right now ICAO is going to have a special meeting in Cologne. They're doing a lot of testing. Go onto the FAA website, just Google lithium battery tests, and you'll see all the testing they've done. And there's a mandate to the ICAO Dangerous Goods Panel, which writes the air regulations internationally, to look at further restrictions on shipping lithium batteries. This has huge impacts that are sometimes not thought about. I was in a congressional hearing and I was asked, why would you put a 100-kilogram lithium battery on a cargo plane, ship it across the United States when you could have just put it on a truck? Well, it was one of a kind. It was used for a weather satellite. It was going to save thousands of people's lives, and I didn't want to have it put on a truck because it would be more likely to be involved in an accident and get damaged, and that would set the program back 2 years.
Wow.
So, you know, there's different reasons. And also the medical device manufacturers. There's people that have implantables. You know, those are designed to really high standards. Are we worried about that? What really bugs me is that if you look at some of the plane crashes and you go back and look at the cargo manifests on those planes, there's undeclared lithium batteries coming from people who are not manufacturing them to the standards that are required in the regulations now. Let's enforce the existing regulations, and let's not create more restrictions and more regulation that are so complicated that I can't even understand them, and I'm supposed to be an expert. You know, so you could see I get a little passionate about
I
these
get
things.
on my soapbox about those things too.
Put Bob down as undecided,
Undecided.
but you know, the truth is, you know, even the value jet crash, for people that are old enough to kind of
Yes,
remember that.
yes, the oxygen cylinders
Yeah, the
and
oxygen
stuff.
cylinders
Oxygen
should not have been
generators,
shipped
yeah.
on that plane to begin with. It was already against the regulations, but we've had,
Right.
you know, further tiers, and there certainly is a difference. It's one thing to have a set of rules for a truck where you can just pull over the side of the road.
Yes.
It's a different thing to have, it's, you know, has to be risk-based, and that's the one piece that I think, you know, the regulators constantly looking at. And now that we are transporting 1.37 million barrels a day of crude oil by rail, up 49% just from last year, you know, that's a significant number that has changed. Why is that? We have insufficient pipeline capacity
That's
in the
correct.
Bakken region. You can't move a pipeline, but you sure can move a rail car. So, you know, these things come and go, and they change almost on a daily basis.
Wow.
You know, regulators have to keep pace not only of, you know, new technologies coming out, but, you know, how is the marketplace, how is the economy changing?
Yes,
You
because
know,
that's an integral
when it-
part of
Yeah,
transportation.
when there's cuts in
Yeah.
the economy, it's not doing well, maybe they're going to lay off some safety people,
Right.
and then you don't have that oversight.
Or the price of gasoline goes,
That's what
or
used to worry
diesel
me.
goes way up, and
Sure.
now trucking is depressed, and shipping becomes the big thing, or something like that.
I was lucky. The economy actually went down a little bit when I was in charge, and so my numbers went really up. My safety metrics is like
But you know,
less incidents.
I know we're about out of time, but that's also a good point because when the economy was down, we'd average about 1 million shipments of hazardous materials a day. Now we're up to almost 1.4 million shipments each and every day. So, you know, even though there are hazardous materials incidents, I think it's important to keep it in context that
Of the, in the proportion in the total
that
number.
in the
Wow.
proportion that, you know, almost everything does make it safely to its destination, and that number is also accurate with respect to pipeline transportation.
Wow. Well, I think we have time to maybe open it up to a question from the floor.
I'm the director of transportation for hazardous waste disposal company, and frequently drivers are put in a position of having to inform shippers that their containers are not compliant.
They can't take the shipment, yeah.
In a,
Yeah.
you know, puts us in an awkward situation. Then the drivers are trained, and but inevitably they don't catch every non-compliant container. So we get an inspection on the road, and as a transporter, we get a violation. But in 6 years as director of transportation, I've never seen that followed up with the shipper as a follow-up to the violation.
I want to take this one.
On the road. And I'd like to know that the shipper and the transporter are equally liable in those
Right.
cases. Why don't they go back and look at
Okay.
the shipper in those situations?
That's great. I worked with the American Trucking Associations, and Rich Moskowitz at the time, he's no longer there, came to me and said, hey, Bob, this is a problem. You know, first of all, if we notify the shipper they're not compliant, they're just going to go to another trucking company, so it puts us in an awkward position. But why is it that we get roadside inspections, they find an obvious shipper violation, like something wrong on a shipping paper, and then we get the fine? And he identified all of the fines that like his trucking company members had, and I was trying to work with him to change that. One of the things we did is we looked at our enforcement people and we said, in each one of the modal administrations, you need to do more shipper inspections. The shipper is really the one who is the root of this issue. If he doesn't do his job properly, you know, it's not going to be, you know, a carrier can only do so much. Unfortunately, you know, I don't know if that's ever going to change. You just have to be vigilant and keep pressing about that. But I think maybe with some automation, working to do some automated roadside inspection procedures, and with that, you may be able to get some enhancements. But what we used to tell our enforcement guys was follow the breadcrumbs. So in other words, if they pulled you over and they found something that was obvious shipper violation, and FAA, to their credit, they do a lot of this because they'll find something in a FedEx facility or UPS, and they'll go back and they'll go after the shipper. So, you know, I think it's getting a little bit better, but it's not perfect, unfortunately.
Agree.
Okay, we have another question.
Yeah, I can't understand why that wouldn't be just a slam dunk and it would just automatically go right back to the shipper.
Yeah.
They've got all the information they need. I mean, it's a phone call.
Yeah, because it's got to be on
Yeah,
paper.
so, you know, about 85% of the inspections are conducted by what we call our state partners, right? So that's the state police and the other guys. Well, they get graded on, you know, how many traffic stops they make, what percent of interventions they do. So they're interested in writing tickets to the state. They're not really interested in an out-of-state shipper or somebody somewhere else. And I think it's unfortunate because it's true. Plus, you know, their view ultimately is the truck driver is the captain of his ship, and he's got to be responsible for everything he takes on board because we have to have a simple enforcement process. We have to have one person to go after. That being said, yeah, I agree with you. It results in some issues. What we used to do is we would look to see, we would track shippers and see how they were involved in repeated violations of some sort,
Yeah.
and
We
then
still
we
do
would
that.
go
Yeah.
see the shipper. But you know, the truth is, it's the lowest hanging fruit is to just beat up on the poor guy driving the truck.
I'll give you a recommendation. It might be to your advantage to participate in a group called the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance and COMED. COMED is the Cooperative Hazardous Materials and Education and Development Program. And they have meetings once a year, or at least several times a year, but the big meetings once a year. And you can go, the industry is invited to mingle with the enforcement people. And a lot of smart companies will go there and they'll do presentations on some problems that they're seeing in roadside inspections, and it helps to educate those enforcement people, and they try to impose a more consistent approach across the country.
Yeah.
So you could be very proactive in
So
participating in that.
yeah, so there will be CVSA, Commercial Motor Vehicle Safety Alliance. So whoever is Jersey, New Jersey, I don't know who the state partner for DOT is in New Jersey. Is it the
We
state
could find
police
out
or-
for you.
But those guys will be there. and then you get to know them, and you get to know the major colonel that's in charge, and then you can pick up, because I've done this for people, pick up the phone and say, hey, your officer just wrote all this whatever, and you get it taken care of. But the state police agencies, the DPS agencies, they need to know that it's an issue. And so CVSA or COMED's a great place
So they
to
can
do
take
that.
corrective actions. yeah.
Because a lot of times the hazardous material incidences are actually reported by, state police and county police and those types of entities, and not necessarily caught by a transportation inspector, and
Well,
has to
we
work
had
it up the chain.
16,000 incidents reported to us a year on average, and they were mostly coming in from 8 carriers.
Wow.
So there's a lot of underreporting, and it's unfortunate. But
Wow.
one of the things that we did is we built a database that all the enforcement people throughout DOT would use, and it's got algorithms built into it and a risk assessment on who should be inspected, because there's so many shippers and carriers that
Yes.
can't possibly hit them all. So
Right.
we would use that, and they would also know who has been inspected before, so you don't get FMCSA showing up at your front door today,
Yeah.
FAA tomorrow, PHMSA the
Right.
next day. They can better utilize, that used to happen. They can better utilize their resources.
And sharing information and,
Yes.
and making the decision who's going to go after
Yeah,
it.
and the reason why the state guys do care is the commercial motor vehicle programs at the states are funded by the feds. So if there's an issue there, they are actually attentive to the concerns.
And hazardous waste shipments really are the triple whammy. You've got a hazardous material that's subject to environmental requirements and manifesting, because it's waste, regulated waste. You got safety considerations that are the truck that has to be met. And then you've got the transportation aspects of it.
When we were talking about the needles washing up on Sandy Hook, I was at the agency when we wrote the medical waste rules. It was a nightmare. I mean, there was no compliance out there, and we worked very closely with the medical waste community to get that straightened out. I think we've made a lot of success in that area.
Wow, okay. Do we have another question from the floor?
Standing between them.
Yeah, people want to have a beer.
I'll change channels a little bit here. Transportation of hazardous goods and hazmat is very expensive in this country. The tariffs on trains and so forth that you're going to pay are extremely high in comparison to regular goods like groceries or something like that. Do you think that, I don't know, something like chlorine, for instance, where there's a substitution you could use or something, that there's industry, that it could be regulated in some way, where you just go to sodium hypochlorite or something like that?
That's definitely been considered by the regulators, but calcium hypochlorite is not as efficient as chlorine. Chlorine still is one of the best things for water treatment. So it becomes difficult. And I'll tell you what, I think most carriers would tell you, maybe they wouldn't tell you openly in public, but they'd rather not carry hazmat.
Yep.
Hazmat is maybe 2-3% of all the cargo that they're taking, and guess what? It probably takes more than 50% of their time to manage it, and it poses a more of a risk than they're just carrying lumber or paper or something else.
And if you're
and
an
the
individual,
railroads,
yeah.
I mean, luckily they're regulated, so they have to take it because God
Right.
forbid they wouldn't take chlorine
Right.
shipments or ammonium
Oh, yeah.
nitrate or some of those things that they need to move to make our economy work.
And if you're an individual truck driver, independent, who owns your own truck, okay, you have all of that training and all of the stuff that you have to do to your truck, that in a lot of cases you have to bear that expense yourself.
Sure.
So, okay, it's time to go and have a beer, and I want to thank our transportation panelists.
Thank you.
Interesting
was fun.
discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, not so fast. I don't know about you guys, but I've just been blown away by the panelists that we've had. This is not in my script. I hope it's okay. It has just been fantastic. I would love to see this on an annual basis, that we figure out a way to incorporate this. I have learned so much today. This has just been amazing. And I want to thank again the panelists. Y'all were exceptional. I mean, it was just the dialogue, just everything. I mean, it was And I am so, you know what, we need to tell everybody that wasn't here this afternoon what they missed, because this was just awesome. Okay. Oh, here it started out. Wasn't that a fantastic program? I really cannot thank y'all enough for joining us today and for the speakers. And when we first started talking about how to celebrate our 30th anniversary, we knew we wanted to highlight the history of our profession and leave everyone excited about the future and what it might hold. I had no idea our speakers would energize an entire room like they have, and they certainly did. Before we adjourn, can I ask Diane and the speakers to come back up front, please? And if we could have another round of applause for them. We have some thank you gifts for our speakers, so please don't leave. And if y'all don't mind, if y'all just stay here for a little bit. One of the things, we had a little, some interesting information that came to light today that I think is extremely appropriate. You know, we had a gentleman come up in the very beginning to talk to us about the history of the organization, and that was Ken Manchin. It just so happens that today is Ken Manchin's birthday. I just want to thank all of y'all again for participating today, especially those that were joining us online, and thank you so much for those questions. We appreciate all your contributions to the discussions. The good news is we can keep these conversations going. If you're not part of our LinkedIn group, please join us there. For those of you online, have a fantastic evening. And for those of us that are still in New Orleans, it's time to say, here in the Big Easy, let the good times roll. Please join our reception out in the foyer, and thank you again for being part of IHMM's history. Have a fantastic evening. Thank you.